This question is a yes-no question. Sometimes data sufficiency questions are yes-no questions. They want to know, does the statement give you enough information to answer the question definitively? If it does, it's sufficient. If it doesn't, then it's not sufficient. Now, what are we curious about? First of all, it's a question about speed. So let's just remind ourselves, speed is what? It is distance over time. We know it's a question about speed when we look at the two statements. And whenever you see a question, you want to ask, well, what's the question behind the question? How can I simplify the question? We want to know if someone will take more than 2 hours to finish this walk. So let's talk about speed. And one thing we're curious about, what units do we want to use? Do we want to use miles? Do we want to use kilometers? Do we want to use hours? Do we want to use minutes? Well, to answer that question, look at the statements. They both talk about kilometers. Statement 1 gives us a speed in kilometers per hour. So why don't we turn our information into a speed kilometers per hour? Distance over time, kilometers per hour. The speed we're curious about is what? 16 kilometers every 2 hours, which of course simplifies to 8 kilometers per hour. Let me write it down here. 8 kilometers per hour. And what about 8 kilometers per hour? The question behind the question here, what we want to know is whether this person is walking at a speed that is slower than 8, and maybe I'll even write out the words, slower than. Now, this may seem a little silly, but slower than 8 kilometers per hour means what? So, for example, 5 kilometers per hour, well, that's slower than 8 kilometers, and 10 kilometers an hour, faster than 8 kilometers per hour. And why am I pointing out the obvious here? Well, because on a time test, it isn't always obvious. It's easy to get confused. When we look at each statement, we're wondering if it tells us definitively whether this person is traveling at a slower rate than 8 kilometers per hour. That is the question behind the question. Okay, so with all of that, let's take a look. Statement 1, our thought process paid off. We're told the person is walking 6.4 kilometers per hour. That is slower than 8. Boom, statement 1, sufficient information to answer the question. So the answer, it could be A or it could be D. It could be that each statement is sufficient. We haven't looked at 2 yet. It could be that each is sufficient, but we can definitely rule out B, C, and E. We can't say that statement 2 and only statement 2 is sufficient. We don't need them together, and of course we can't say that neither is sufficient. All right, statement 2, we're going to write 1 kilometer for every 9 minutes. We want distance over time, not the reverse. Now let's turn that into kilometers per hour. So we're going to multiply this by what the conversion ratio is, it's called. 60 minutes is the same as 1 hour. So if I multiply these together, minutes and minutes cancel. I have on the top, I have 60 kilometers. On the bottom, I have 9 hours. So that is how many kilometers per hour? We'll do some quick math. Why don't we do it up here? 60 divided by 9. 9 times 6 is 54. So we subtract 54. 6 with a remainder of 6. 6 and 6 ninths, which is the same as 6 and 2/3, which is the same as approximately 6.67 kilometers per hour. So 6.67 kilometers per hour, also slower than 8 kilometers per hour. Both speeds are slower than 8 kilometers per hour. Each statement gives us sufficient information to answer that question. Answer D. A very good speed question, and just to review it, we're given units here, miles, kilometers. You look at the statements, we see minutes, we see hours. First question is, what units should I use? Well, the two statements both talk about kilometers, so let's use kilometers. It's easier to start with hours, so we find the rate, 8 kilometers per hour, but then we clarify the question. What do they really want to know? They want to know if the rate at which this person is walking is what? Slower than 8 kilometers per hour. Both statements tell us that it is. Answer D. Hope that made sense. If it did, please click the like button, share the video with your friends who are taking the GMAT. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. And to see many more explanations to math questions on the practice tests on MBA.com, as well as practice questions from the GMAT official guide, be sure to go to our YouTube channel, click on the column in the middle that says Playlists. We'll see you in the next video.